We were sitting in the circle. It was just coming up to 8:30, and the second feature, newsreel and adverts had all been on. A deathly hush came over the theatre as the tabs closed, and then suddenly a spot shone on a piano in the pit as it began playing, apparently unaided. Everybody seemed amazed when suddenly another spot picked out the console of the mighty Wurlitzer as the organist rose majestically from the depths in accompaniment to the ragtime music coming from the piano. Just the sort of trick they might have employed to arrest your attention in the 30s, you might think. Nothing of the kind. This happened at the Granada Kingston in January 1975, and the man in the spotlight was none other than our good friend Don Knights, who's right here in the studio to tell us all about his fascinating career as a cinema organist. Don, welcome to our programme, and it's very nice to have you here in the Medway Towns. Tell us, how did this all come about this year of all times?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say how happy I am to be with you in Medway and talking to you on the programme which I enjoy listening to so much. And the reason why we had the shows at the Granada Kingston was because of the enthusiasm of Dennis Coffin, who works endless hours putting the organ in shape, and the manager, who's very keen to present organ shows and to give Granada the idea that the organ is a worthwhile presentation and not just simply a debit on the account sheet, that it can be something very acceptable and draw in more patrons. And he's a young man, 25 years old, and it's very surprising to find that it's not simply the old people who remember the old days when they sat in the back stalls with their sweetheart, as we used to call them in those days, who think nostalgically of the organ. It's the young people who enjoy it so much. And their attitude is, well, what's the big secret? Why haven't we seen this before? Why is it hidden from us? Why aren't we given the chance to say that we like this thing? Not hidden away under a dust sheet and nobody even knows it's there.
Ramsey, I think, had something to do with your interest in the theatre organ in the first place.
Oh yes, very much so, because in the first place I learnt from a very good musician. First of all, I learnt in the church, of course, but I took a liking to the cinema organ, and the first time I ever liked one at all was when I heard Reg New play on the radio from the Beaufort Cinema, Washford Heath, and he played things like Nola, and I thought, well, there might be something in that. It's only like the choir organ of my church organ, but still, I think it's got something. And I took the trouble to learn the theatre organ, and it was a nice job in those days. But the trouble was that you learned to play an organ, but then they said to you, well, you can't obviously do a job unless you've had experience of a job already. How do you get the experience of a job if you've never had one? It's always best to go to the king if you want to get pardon for something or other, not to go to the county court or something. So I went to none other than Harold Ramsey, and he welcomed me with open arms. I learnt the church organ with Norman Colley, who comes from the school of Goss Custard and Cunningham, and so it's from that angle that I approach the organ, because there are various approaches. Mine is as an organist, but some people approached it as a pianist, because there are many pianists who played in bands, like Sidney Torch, for example.
Yes,
and he just thought he'd try his hand at the organ, or the organist wasn't there one day, and he tried it and found he could do it very well. So some took that approach, and others, well, they just sort of drifted into it because the money was good. For no other reason, but they might have been good showmen.
And the place where I believe that you learned was it the Regent at Stamford Hill in the first
Yes,
place?
that's right, yes.
And who was it there that was
Leslie Simpson was the organist.
Oh, yes, yes.
When I went to Leslie Simpson on the Wurlitzer, he taught me something I didn't know. In other words, how to play jazz and syncopate and getting on the keys and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, he probably got what was at that time a totally different approach.
That's right, yes. He came from the school of Dixon. They all came from Sheffield. There are many well-known organists who came from Sheffield at that time.
I presume that having, after that, gone to Harold Ramsey, you must have had a liking for him and his playing to have gone there in the first place.
Oh, yes, you couldn't fail to, because it was a question that, as you know yourself, and everybody knows, a person who is wholly enthralled with their subject can talk about that subject to a person who hasn't got the slightest interest in it, and they will be interested. Like we say, Walford Davies was about music, or Fred Streeter about gardening, and people couldn't care less about gardening, so they don't go know mustard and cress from delphiniums. But he can get them interested, and that's the kind of person that Harold Ramsey was. He overwhelmed you with his enthusiasm, and you just simply had to go along. Go away.
Don, were there any other people at that time who had any influence on your styling or really meant something to you as players?
I had the very great privilege of being assistant to Don Baker at the Granada Edmonton, and I really think he influenced me more than anybody else at all. I met Don Baker again about 4 years ago in California, and he was introducing me to people and saying, this is the fellow who used to do my show on my days off. And people said, how could anybody do your show on your day off? But we did. And the shows he used to put on were fantastic. He used to do one in particular, which was a slideshow, and it was a crossword puzzle. And you'd have, first of all, the name of the tune would be somewhere telling you the first clue in the crossword, one across, you see, and there'd be another tune, one down, and that sort of stuff, which, as you can imagine, was very, very complicated.
It was really audience participation, though, was it?
That one was, yes.
After those days at Edmonton, though, what was the next step in the career?
I think after that I went to the ABC at Mitcham, which was a steady-going job, paid good regular money.
That was at the old Majestic.
That's right, Majestic, yes. And the reason I held that job down was because we had to play for variety.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
See, and there were plenty of organists around who could play their own particular piece, but when you get a fellow comes up and he says, oh, well, this is it, I'm sorry, we've only got this part left, and he gives you a second clarinet part, and you're supposed to make up a full score from that, and that's mostly tacit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the sort of problem you had. Or some would come in and say, oh, well, we just do a bit of ballet, ballet from Sylvia, or a bit of the Nutcracker, that'll do, just play that, it's like that.
And what sort of an instrument did you have at Majestic Mitcham?
6th-rank Compton. It wouldn't be reckoned as one of the best organs around, no doubt. But the main point about it was that everything worked, had a nice illuminated console. We were no competition to the Granada Tooting down the road because we were utterly different, but we were more a family house.
How long did that last?
That lasted until the outbreak of war. And then every theatre organist, and in fact every person who was in a cinema was, shall we call it, sacked or stood off or something, because public meetings were not allowed anymore until they saw exactly what would be the shape of things to come, in the words of H.G. Wells. They thought probably everybody would be bombed within the first 5 minutes of declaring war. And so there were no public meetings allowed, which cut out cinema. So we all got the sack everywhere for 3 weeks. And then they saw how things went. And I was digging the garden over one day, and Tony Lowry came along and said, what are you wasting your time doing that for? I've got a job for you at the Granada Tooting.
Having said that, I don't think you would have considered that digging the garden over was a waste of time, because I see in your lapel you've got a National Trust emblem, so I gather you're rather interested in nature anyway.
That's right, definitely.
Hostilities didn't really stop everything, did they? It got going again. And,
yes. And I well remember doing a week down in Granada, Wurlitzer, and really I didn't have to play the organ at all. I simply played Pack Up Your Troubles in Your Old Kit Bag and Let's All Go Down the Strand and Roll Out the Barrel, and they just sang so loud I just sit back and have a rest until the second chorus started.
So the war had its light-hearted side, but
oh yes,
you were called up, I believe.
Yes. That's right.
Where did you end up during the war?
Well, we ended up in Germany, but I was one of the lucky ones.
When the war was over, we come back to good old Blighty. And,
that's it. Granada and the Odeon, change of circuit. I went to the Odeon, Watford.
Uh-huh.
Stayed there a while, but I thought, well, nobody's going to hear me in Watford, so I moved down to Richmond. And which was a much better centre for touring around the various organs which were situated in West London.
And how long did you stay then with Odeon after the war as a regularly employed organist?
Oh, not very long actually. It seems a long time, and I thought it was going to be forever, but it was about 2 years actually. Mm-hmm. And then I went in the civil service, which is a good thing I did, by way of getting a pension nowadays. But I was always on the Odeon staff, and I still am. Uh-huh. I've never broken that. Even to this day, I am a member of the Odeon staff.
That's very interesting,
yes.
Despite the fact that we see you appearing at the Granada Kingston.
That's right, yes.
We've, in recent years, seen one or two recordings which you've made, very nice ones as well. The first of those was on concert recording, and was done at Abington, I believe.
Yes, we enjoyed very much making that recording at Abington and took a lot of trouble in getting the microphones set in the right place. And many people thought I was crazy to make a theatre organ record of entirely Viennese music.
Do you think, looking back, I mean, that was done in 1968, was your faith in doing a Strauss album on the theatre organ justified? Has it been a success?
Yes, emphatically it's been a success, because now people will say to me, "Oh, you're the fellow who plays Strauss." Whereas before, how could they say to me, "You're the fellow who played some more pops"?
Since then, we've seen 2 or 3 other albums on the Deroy label more recently. What was it? 2 were made at Henley, I believe.
That's right, yes.
Is there any interesting story behind those?
Not particularly, but the object of those records was more or less to explore the width of possibilities in repertoire on the theatre organ once more. In fact, I'm really back to square one, aren't I? That I didn't want to play another record of pops.
There is one medley in there which I think is very close to your heart. That's the one about San Francisco, isn't it?
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, of course, that is my second home, San Francisco. My daughter lives there, and like many other people, I suppose, we take to it very naturally. But, of course, my daughter being there is still another reason to take to it very naturally. and above all things, the whole atmosphere of the place is so enthusiastic.
Tell us something about the organs in and around San Francisco.
Well, of course, all the famous organs have gone, like they have everywhere else. The Golden Gate and the various other cinemas on Market Street have all gone except the Orpheum, and I've played that one, and I hope to play that one again this time, which is I think about a 4 manual and 24 unit Robert Morton. But the funny thing about that organ is that the sounds are more than stereo. They come at you from all over the theatre.
Oh.
You'll hear a harp come from the top left-hand side, and then you'll hear a post horn come from under the stage, and then you'll hear the strings come from above the stage, and things like that.
Oh, yes.
But I rather think that is a favourite idea of organs out in San Francisco, because I also play at a pizza parlour over there when I was over there. In fact, he wants me to go over there and live there, but I don't want to do that job. And there are many of the units of the organ, especially the effects, distributed all round the hall. The organ itself is behind a big glass screen, so you can see everything that's working, and it has a system whereby if you put down the strings part will light up, whereas the diapason section will remain in darkness, and then they light it up in various colours and all this sort of jazz, so it keeps them interested.
It's really a modern-day version of the old illuminated console, then.
Oh,
really.
yes, and some more, yes, that's right.
But you didn't only play pipe organs, I believe. You found some electronics of interest in San Francisco, didn't you?
Oh, yes, very much so. I played, I think, most of the electronic organs there are over there. But the organ which I fell for in a very big way was the Rodgers. I think that is to my liking for playing, I think the Rodgers is easily the best, but of course it's equally the dearest.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I believe you sort of did another leg across the Pacific to pop into Hawaii for a spell, didn't you?
That's right, yes, that's it. And I hope to be going there again this year. But the thing about that is that it's not simply a question of going 2,500 miles, it's a question of going to a totally different world. It's totally different altogether, and it's nothing like Hawaii 5-0 on the television either. In my case, I like the soothing things, so therefore the Hawaiian music has a wonderful appeal, and it so happens that the organ in Hawaii is just that kind of organ. It's a very soothing organ with nothing strident about it.
That's this Robert Morton which you've
played.
Got on the record.
That's right, yes. They've got 2 Robert Mortons there, actually, and it's strange to think that they went out there in 1922 when we had no theatre organs in this country at all, not one. The first one hadn't arrived in Walsall, leave alone in Regent Street. not many people know the reason why they're called Robert Morton organs, and that is because the managing director of the firm who built the organs was puzzling his head one day, well, I've got this marvellous organ, now what can I call it? And thought of several ideas and just didn't like any of them. And he was looking out at his garden where his two children were playing, and one was called Robert and the other was called Morton. So he thought, well, what's the matter with that? Talking of that, I've got no axes to grind because I'm also a personal friend of Mr. Wurlitzer. Of course, he's no longer with us, unfortunately. But I think if you had him on this programme, well, you just book him up for the next 10 programmes because he knows more about theatre organs and why they went in and the personalities than any of us. The most gentle and kind gentleman you ever met in your life. Most charming man. We were very honoured to see him at all. And he said to us, well, would you like a piece of my cheese? Well, now, this is the accolade. If he offers you a piece of his cheese, you are one of the elite few. And it's a particular Canadian cheddar, which incidentally you can't get here now, which he liked, and it was rather twangy, rather strong. And so it goes a great big lump of this cheese which we took with us, and so everywhere we went after that we had to say to them that it's the cheese that smells and not us.
What about the future? Have you got any special plans?
Well, I hope to retire before very long, about a year's time. It looks like it very much. And then our daughters invited us to live in San Francisco for half the year and avoid the winter over here, so we may perhaps do that.
Don Knights, thank you very much indeed for sparing the time to come along and talk to us. And very best wishes for the future.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to come and talk to you, and let's hope that the organ in general has a very good future. Many people will enjoy it from now on.